Well, hello. I hope that you and your family and loved ones are all doing well as we continue to shelter in place. This particular video segment is on Chapter 18 of our business law textbook. We continue with contracts, and in this particular segment, we talk about performance and discharge. Well, what in the world does that mean? We'll get to that in a moment, but per our usual review, as you may recall, there are four essential elements to a contract. An agreement, consideration, capacity, and legality. Agreement, was there offer and acceptance? Consideration, are there benefits flowing between the parties? Capacity, is the person over the age of 18 and not crazy? And legality, is it for a legal purpose and not contrary to public policy? Well, assuming we have all those four elements into play, we have what is arguably a valid agreement, which begs the next question. And something you may be asking yourself right now with regard to what we're going through with the sheltering in place, where does it all end, right? Where does this all end? And we ask that question in this particular chapter. Where do our duties under the contract end? When are we all done? Well, that's what those terms in the chapter refer to, performance and discharge. Arguably, or typically, and ideally, when the contract duties are performed by the parties, their duties are discharged and the contract's all done. In a bilateral contract, where I sell you my 1995 red Corvette convertible, you give me the $10,000, you perform. I give you the keys and the pink slip. I perform in our bilateral contract, which is a promise for a promise. We perform our respective duties, and our duties are then and our responsibilities are then discharged. Unilateral contract. The person drives the vet from Las Vegas to San Diego. It's a promise for an act. They show up to San Diego. They give me the keys. Here's the car. I perform my duties. I then give them the money for their long drive out from Las Vegas, and I perform my duties. Our duties in the unilateral contract are now discharged, our responsibilities, performance and discharge. And that's when the contract all ends. But you see in a lot of contracts, situations where certain requirements have to be met before the parties either have their duties to perform, or if those requirements are not met, it may discharge the parties from their duties. And we kind of touched on that in one of our previous hypotheticals with the students up front. The counteroffer was made by a student. I'll buy the 1995 red Corvette convertible. However, before I do, I want my mechanic to check it out. A condition was attached to the new counteroffer, and that condition could mean that if the car's checked out and it's okay, then I buy it. But if my mechanic looks at it and says, this is a piece of junk, you shouldn't buy it, I am then off the hook. My duties are discharged. I'm no longer required and obligated to buy the vet. So you've got three types of conditions that can affect our duties to perform in a contract. The first type of condition listed in the textbook is known as a condition precedent. Generally speaking, a condition is a qualification in a contract based upon a possible future event. A condition precedent, as you see here on the PowerPoint, is a condition that must be fulfilled before a party's performance may be required. Now, if I want to buy a piece of real estate, I got to get a loan. And so I contact a loan company and they say, sure, we'll lend you the money. Let's sign this initial memorandum, which states that we'll lend you the money, provided that you qualify for the loan. You need to give us copies of your check stubs, your tax statements, as well as your bank account statements. We'll take a look at it and see whether or not you qualify for the loan. Hopefully, they'll review all that documentation and say, oh yes, Bollinger qualifies, we will lend him the money. But if they look at the documentation and say, Bollinger's stretched a little thin, we don't see how we can possibly make that monthly mortgage payment to us, then they can say, sorry, based upon that, you don't qualify for the loan. Based upon our condition precedent, you did not meet the requirements. Our duties to lend you the money, our duties are discharged. Condition is not met, duties are discharged. So that's a condition precedent, and you'll be coming across that later in life when you try to buy a house and try to get a loan. There's also a condition subsequent, a condition that operates to terminate a party's absolute promise to perform. That comes later on down the timeline in the contractual agreement. Best example of that I can come up with is a lot of you people are accounting majors. Hopefully, while you're a LOMA, you're going to get a job, an internship, rather, with an accounting firm, and they will set you up, and hopefully, if it works out well, once you graduate, they may extend to you an offer for employment. And in that contract you might sign, it will contain a provision that will say you will have 3 opportunities, hopefully, to pass the CPA exam. If you don't pass the CPA exam on those 3 tries, then you will no longer be our employee. So you sign that agreement. You sign that agreement that contains that condition subsequent. You go to work for that accounting firm. You're sharpening pencils. You're getting coffee, and you may be even doing some accounting work that the actual licensed accountants review, confirm, and sign off on themselves. And then in the meantime, you study and you take the exam the first time. Don't pass it. Shoot. You study and take the exam the second time. Ooh, don't pass it. You got a third shot at it. You study real hard. You take the exam and you don't pass it. Oh no. And so your supervising accountant brings you in his office and regrettably says, sorry, it didn't work out. You had 3 shots. You didn't pass the exam. You're no longer working for us because you did not meet the requirements of that condition subsequent. Conditions are not met, duties are discharged, and then you go on your way to continue to study and hopefully take and eventually pass that CPA exam. So those are condition precedent, a condition subsequent. There are also conditions known as concurrent conditions. And legal people, lawyers call them that, but they're basically what we've been talking about all along. Go back to the bilateral contract. I promise to pay. I promise to give you the keys and the pink slip for the vet. You promise to pay me $10,000. These are concurrent conditions. The exchanges are made, and the performance is complete, and the duties of the parties are discharged. We're all done. They call that concurrent conditions. There's also situations that involve what are known as express and implied conditions. Express and implied conditions. And that's a situation where, well, when we have express conditions, they're actually written within the 4 corners of the contract. You'll see words like if, and provided that, and after, or before, or when. And those are usually trigger words that will tell you that there is some type of condition that's expressly written in the contract, either a condition precedent or a condition subsequent. But sometimes there'll be contracts that, although the condition is not within the 4 corners of the document, the courts, when the parties hit a snag and are looking at the contractual agreement and reviewing what the parties agreed to, they'll say, well, although it doesn't expressly say it in the contract, we see that there is an implied condition here based upon what the parties did agree to. And the courts will say there's an implied condition. It's not expressly written, but it does exist. So there are express conditions and there are implied conditions in contracts. So those are situations that exist where something can occur that might either place into motion the liability, or rather the requirement for the parties to perform, or in a lot of situations, if the condition is not met, the parties' duties are discharged. Otherwise, if there are no conditions in the contract, we're talking about performance of the contract and discharge of the duties of the parties. And you can have discharge of the duties by performance. You can have discharge of the duties under the contract by agreement between the parties. And you can have discharge of the duties based upon what they call operation of law. And those are the three other points, the three other types of discharge that we'll be covering within the last two segments of this chapter. See that we've reached the 10-minute mark here, so we're going to sign off here, and then we'll pick up in the next video segment with discharge by performance and possibly discharge by agreement. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy.